want to thank our presenters today, Dr. Domarina Oshana and Aziz Thalabi, influencing industry ethical behavior through the use of academic processes and a research center's perspective on a hybrid approach to research. I see your shared screen is ready to go. So we'll give our speakers plenty of time to go through their presentation, and then I want to leave some time for discussion. If anyone during the talk, if anyone has a question or a comment, please post in the chat, or you can simply unmute yourself at the end and we'll circle back to any questions we have. With that, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tyler. Hi, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you here. I will kick it off and then hand it over to Dr. Domarina Oshana to do the bulk of the presentation. So we've entitled our talk, Influencing Industry Ethical Behavior Through the Use of Academic Processes. And we would like to speak with you all and seek feedback on a hybrid approach to research. We believe this is highly relevant to individuals who want to do applied research, particularly those who are part of research centers, but not necessarily so. There's increasingly a desire for academics to be able to conduct applied research from the beginning to end in terms of processes. And we think that our process could perhaps be some food for thought, and we seek your feedback throughout the conversation as well. So next slide, please, Domi. So I'll kick it off with a brief description about us and who we are, and then we'll jump into some background around the academics and industry dual audience that we have through our work at the Research Center. And we'll talk about our hybrid approach that we've developed, and Domi will talk through the illustrative case study relating to trust in financial services and the work that we've done around that. And then, as Tyler mentioned, saving plenty of time to be able to have discussion about our research with all of you. So we are part of the American College of Financial Services. The college has been in existence for 94 years. We're currently based in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. The origin of the college was to be able to provide education to professionals in the financial services sector, particularly in life insurance. At the time, in the early 1900s, the idea of education for sales teams within industry, it was an ethical duty. It was important to be able to have sales teams really understand the products and the impact that it would have on the clients. Over time, as the financial services sector has grown and diversified, so has the college, and we provide a number of designations to professionals within the industry, as well as to master's programs and a PhD program, which we're currently winding down in terms of the research provided. I wanted to share that background because I think it's really important to Domi and I, as we think about our role at the American College McGuire Center for Ethics. Our roots have been in the applied education space as an institution. And for us as researchers, it's important to think about that history and the mission of the center, which is to raise the level of ethical behavior in the financial services industry, to think of those two together and how our research can, again, be very applied and very practical for professionals in business who don't have a lot of time to think about the big picture of the ethics challenges, but are very, very interested in guidance around the ethical dilemmas that they face on a day-to-day basis. And for us as researchers, it's important to be evidence-based. So finding a way to be able to match those two paradigms is the focus of this talk. So finally, one last introductory slide from me, and I'll turn it over to Domi. Just a brief background. I am a lawyer by training. I have worked in a number of different environments, including the private sector and the nonprofit space, as well as in the regulatory space. I spent most of my legal career at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York working on bank regulatory challenges. And I think that's highly relevant to the work that we do at the Ethics Center, because ethics is about encouraging systems and behaviors and people to go above and beyond the law. And I think the regulatory community really understands how the law is not necessarily the answer to all of our challenges within business and society today. And that's the work that Domi and I do to try to define and provide frameworks and evidence-based approaches to doing the ethical thing in business. So Domi, over to you with the next slide.
Thank you, Azish. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to apologize in advance. My voice is very off today, but I'm feeling great. I was telling that to Tyler and Azish earlier, so really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning. My name is Domarina Oshana. Everyone calls me Domi, so please feel free to call me Domi. I am a social scientist by educational background. My roots are in developmental, educational, and cultural psychology, very interdisciplinary. And I paired that theoretical background with a PhD in research methodology to give me an understanding and a grounding of the research process. I am currently leading with Azish, collaborating with her at the McGuire Center for Ethics on research initiatives and also supporting the operational elements of the center's work. So again, it's really great to be here with you all today. I wanted to provide some background on what we wanted to share regarding the college's mission and how that influences our work in the Center for Ethics. The college's mission is to provide applied financial knowledge and education, promote lifelong learning, and advocate for ethical standards for the benefit of society. Its focus on applied knowledge and education is core to the ethos of the Center for Ethics. We really strive to be a thought leader and a trusted go-to resource on ethics and financial services. And one of our guiding principles is to provide applied knowledge that's solution-oriented for our students who are practitioners in financial services. In doing this, though, it raises challenges because of the divergent approaches at serving a dual audience of academics and industry. So let's look at that in the context of social science research. With this slide, what we wanted to show really is the two lenses of academics and industry side by side. When we thought about our dual audiences, academics and industry, we considered various factors, or what I call here complexities, in organizing social science research. And this isn't an exhaustive list. It's only to illustrate our thinking and what's different when you look at research through these two lenses side by side. So from an academic lens, the type of research conducted is basic with the aim of advancing knowledge, improving theories. It's hypothesis-driven, generally objective. There's a recognized hierarchy of design, and that's very important. I remember being trained as a methodologist, my professors ingraining into me that you can't fix by design what you bungled by analysis. So in academics, we know design is very important. Academic research is evaluated by our peers who are also scholars. The timeline is fairly open-ended. Results are intended for public consumption, but not always communicated in terms easily understood by the public. And the risk-reward varies. It is often low risk in terms of what we put in and high reward in terms of what we get back. From an industry lens, it's about applied research towards solving a business problem, maximizing efficiency, reaching business professionals in various organizational functions in a very pragmatic way, and keeping within an oftentimes sensitive schedule, holding the findings fairly closely to our chest, and it's profit-driven, so the risk and reward are often high. So now let's look at how these approaches converged in our work at the Ethics Center. In our hybrid approach, in balancing our dual audiences, our hybrid approach is about conducting applied research to both advance knowledge and solve for a business problem. It's hypothesis-driven, and the hypotheses are often business-oriented. It's important for us at the college and at the center that we're aligned with the college's strategic vision, and at the same time, we have a grounding in the academic literature. Our approach upholds the imperative of strong research design in terms of, for example, sampling, survey questionnaire design, using an external vendor to minimize bias often tied to doing backyard research. if not eliminating that bias. It also recognizes both scholars and business professionals as our audiences. And on the dissemination factor, it's about making our research findings public while also protecting our IP. So for us, it is high risk, high reward. And we wanted to share with you what that looks like as we applied this approach to one of our research projects. So our research project, which is the case study for our presentation, is focused on the consumer perspective of trust and financial services. And the project was mixed methods. It's one part of a larger multi-part study on the perceptions of trust and financial services. The larger project itself also included research on the leadership perspective of trust and perspectives from the broad network of stakeholders within financial services, such as consumer advocates, regulators, educators, and others. For the consumer research, our project goal was to identify existing and emerging trust challenges through a consumer survey and focus groups, as well as in-depth interviews. So we're trying to identify the gaps in trust between financial firms and stakeholders, as well as the opportunities for firms to close those gaps in trust. So we developed and tested 14 hypotheses. We developed and executed an online survey questionnaire. We also conducted 2 focus groups with consumers, each of which included 4 participants. We also did 5 in-depth interviews that we conducted, and the focus groups and the in-depth interviews were staggered because we wanted to shape the process as it went forward by what we were learning. And then our outputs we're currently working on. We have a lot of rich data, a huge data set, and we're going through and trying to surface the stories through infographic reports that will be meaningful and applicable for our business professional audiences. So we're really trying to make them concise, meaningful, and practical. And we're also working on an educational workshop for business professionals and financial services, as well as our press releases. Through all of this, our guiding objectives for the consumer research were anchored to these 4 themes. The first of which were understanding how consumers gain information and conduct transactions with financial institutions. We also wanted to measure consumers' levels of trust with various financial companies, products, and services. We wanted to determine the areas where trust levels were low and to determine the best ways to close those gaps in trust, and also to identify the differences in trust among different demographic groups and understand how those differences could be addressed. So this is what balancing the hybrid approach looked like for us. Throughout the rest of the presentation, I'll be sharing with you challenges and opportunities of navigating our research. And to frame what's ahead, we thought it might help to articulate our challenges and opportunities into these 3 broader themes or buckets, if you will: institutional strategy, managing processes, and marketing and communications. And in terms of institutional strategy, just want to unpack that a bit for you. We have a need and alignment with institutional strategy. And what we're really referring to there is that we first started with a scope of work to our leadership to get buy-in on the project. And 2 strategic opportunities that we had aligned with the college's vision were, 1, to create a unique and proprietary database of survey and qualitative interview data on a topic of importance to the industry, trust. And 2, to highlight trust-related challenges for underserved communities, particularly Black Americans, which an internal group within our college had identified as a void in the industry's relationship with Black communities. So that was really important to us to align on institutional strategy. In terms of opportunity, what we're referring to here is the combination of intellectual capital and our research environment that created the conditions for us to execute our research. Then in terms of managing processes, for credibility, for us, this included involvement of a research advisory group to shape the research. We also involved our IRB at the college to review protections for consumers. Our research advisory group was comprised of individuals both internal and external to the college, as well as researchers and non-researchers to ensure that we were reaching our target audiences. And then we also had to balance that we had to deliver on an accelerated timeline. And in the following slides, you'll see I have a detailed timeline of what it looked like for us over the course of the year, but we pretty much started in March of 2021 and wrapped up our work just this January this year. And then we also negotiated methodology along the way. There were many points throughout our relationship with our vendor where we had to make a number of trade-offs in terms of what questions we were asking, how we were going to ask those questions, what our design would be as we moved from the quantitative component of our research into the qualitative component. We'll talk more about those later. And then lastly, in terms of marketing and communications, we also have been navigating, really are continuing to navigate, communicating the so what of our research and elevating the findings from our research to our target audiences with an angle toward distinguishing the college, distinguishing the center as a thought leader, as a trusted resource in ethics within financial services. So with these themes in mind, we set out to identify a research vendor who aligned with our expectations. And this is essentially a look at what our due diligence, how our due diligence approached things to hire the right research vendor. We were looking for a match on understanding our research complexities. So those things you saw earlier in the slide that I had, our hybrid approach, and I had the various complexities listed. We were looking at matching on managing the research complexities. So not only understanding what we were trying to do, but ensuring that the vendor could actually manage and help us toward getting to the end in mind, which was to have findings that would be meaningful and relevant toward our two audiences of academics and industry. And lastly, we wanted a match on delivering in terms of the hybrid approach. So execution was really important to us, being able to serve us in terms of the timeline, accelerated timeline that we had, and in terms of the deliverables that we were expecting. That was really important to get that kind of communication and commitment early on from a vendor that we could see was aligned with our ultimate vision. So here are some indicators and processes of our hybrid approach. We knew we found the right research vendor based on these indicators or characteristics of the right vendor. We also had alignment on expectations related to research quality and integrity. So I just want to unpack these a little bit. In terms of characteristics of the right vendor, we knew we found the right vendor when we saw that the vendor had a track record of serving custom market research needs of financial services organizations. We also knew we had the right vendor because they were conducting thought leadership studies with university partners. The vendor had capabilities in designing methodologically sound research, including a chief methodologist who had extensive experience leading experiments for premier financial services organizations, as well as publishing in academic journals. And then provision of an established timeline for thoughtful and regular communication. This was really important to us, is that we wanted a true partner in the research process, not just a survey mill. We wanted to ensure that we had somebody that was truly collaborating with us and sharing ideas with us based on their experience in the financial services firms. In many ways, it was like working with a unicorn, trying to find that unicorn and then working with the unicorn to help achieve our shared vision. And then, of course, there's always budgetary constraints and institutional processes that we had to work through. So it was important that we had alignment there as well. In terms of anchors, what I call anchors of research quality and integrity, for us, it was important that our consumer survey had strong rigor behind it. For us, this meant it employed a nationally representative sample There was an online panel that we used with an adequate sample size. We had 1,500 that we were targeting as a national representative sample in the US, and we actually ended up with 1,697 survey responses with a margin of error that's generally considered credible and reliable. So we were at plus or minus 2% on that margin of error, with subgroups slightly larger. We also used best practices in survey design and did the same in our qualitative data collection to ensure that we had a high respondent participation rate and ensure our data quality. We had our research reviewed and approved by the college's institutional review board, ensuring that there was responsible conduct of our research. And this applied for the quantitative component, which was our online consumer survey, as well as the qualitative component, which included our focus groups and in-depth interviews. So we had protocols for both the quantitative and the qualitative component, and had multiple levels of review with the IRB, which we'll see later in our timeline. And then we also conferred with members of our research advisory group, which I spoke of earlier, to advise us on project-related research efforts, ensuring that we were going to reach our target audiences. So this is our very high-level hybrid approach workflow, and what it looked like over the course of the year, over nearly a 1-year period. And you could see here that there were checks and balances as indicated, for example, by multiple rounds of review with our IRB and shaping of the survey early on by our research advisory group. What I really wanted to share here is that we were very systematic and stepwise in our approach to our research. So I won't go into all the detail, but just wanted to convey that process orientation that we brought to our research and the level of detail and thoughtfulness that went into it as we executed. And again, we did all this over a course of a year, so pretty accelerated. Now, in terms of lessons learned, and 2 that we're navigating, we made sure to say 2 we're navigating because we haven't mastered all the lessons. We're still learning as we go. And the top 2 are the ones that we're really learning about and working on at this juncture. The final 3 on the slide are ones that we can say we've kind of navigated through and reflected on. So first is keeping data private while also providing a community benefit. On this challenge, the way we've approached it is that we're in the midst of exploring an opportunity on a call for papers for a special issue of a academic journal to invite academic researchers to analyze the proprietary data set, both the online, the data that was collected through the online consumer survey, as well as the data that was collected through our qualitative research. And so we would like researchers to take a look at this data and to help advance scholarly inquiry into trust for the betterment of society. So we've worked very carefully to craft a draft call for proposals, and we're currently in the midst of working with an academic partner to explore what our roles will be and how to execute on that. The second challenge that we're still in the midst of navigating, but we're getting really good at, I think, is translating stories from our vendors report for our target audiences. And Azish made a really good point to me the other day as we were talking through this. She said, Domi, we got this really detailed report from our vendor. It's 72 slides that shares takeaways or findings from our research. In many ways, Azish said, it's a data dump. And I agree. And as I was thinking about that, I thought about, through what lens are we telling a story? How do you define a story? From whose lens? Who does it have meaning for? So we're really working through that process of trying to surface the stories from our research findings, to personalize the stories from the research, to convey the so what at a level of specificity that has meaning to subject matter experts that are grouped by organizational function within the companies that we're trying to reach that are part of our network. So think here about groups like human resources and employee relations, senior leaders at the C-suite level, compliance and ethics professionals, legal professionals, financial advisors. We're trying to reach these audiences in a pragmatic way through our research findings. A third challenge is and one that's kind of past tense for us, is as we were reflecting on our research, we reflected that there were implicit expectations on our side on how to present gathered feedback to shape the research methods, to shape our research process. And as we reflected on that, our approach, we recognized our approach was really to be very proactive and explicit with our research vendor in terms of our expectations and gathering and collating feedback from our research advisory group. We wanted to ensure that the research advisory group, their voices were heard throughout the development of the survey, and also as we headed into the qualitative phase of the research. And I remember a point at which working with the vendor, and it became this back and forth of going through multiple emails and collecting the feedback that we were getting from the research advisory group, and explicitly saying, one way we could approach this is to do a matrix that shows all of the feedback that we received and how we're responding to it, so that our research advisory group can see that they are being heard. And even though we may not apply everything they say, they can see that they were heard. So that was something we had to be really proactive and explicit about. Another example of being proactive and explicit and added to that is steadfast is in terms of our hypothesis development, testing, and analysis plans. Here too, I think when we went into the research, because we had those matches early on in terms of we found a vendor that understands what we're trying to do, they can manage, they have the experience to manage the research complexities that we talked about earlier, they can deliver for us. They have a track record of delivering. There was this implicit expectation that they would come to the table with hypotheses for us. We had shared with them our beliefs of what we were seeing in financial services, but we also wanted to see what they could add to what our thinking was. And it really became apparent that we had to be the ones to kind of lead. And I remember having a conversation with Azish about this, and Azish helping me to reflect like, hey, Domi, you're really challenging this team, right? So it really was about having to step back and say, literally, here are some hypotheses, here are some beliefs that we have. This is the type of approach we want to take to the research in terms of testing and general analysis plans, and balancing between exploratory and confirmatory analyses so that we could give the college a unique angle in terms of our trust data. And lastly, it was we also had some implicit expectations on the vendor side in terms of how much attention we were paying to what they were giving us. And so I'm very detail oriented, and Azish can attest to this. I don't always get it right, but I'm usually the person that finds the hair on the menu without even trying. And so there were times throughout the project where we would get outputs from our vendor, banners from cross tabulations of our data, analysis plans, that there were a little bit of sloppiness. And sometimes I would find myself having to go back to the vendor and say, you know what, we got the banner, but you left out this key component. Can you please put it back in there? Or, I noticed that there was a discrepancy here. Can you please make sure I'm not missing something here? So there was a bit of back and forth there, but generally speaking, they're pretty much on it, but a bit of sloppiness toward the end there. So just managing that was a bit of a challenge. So all that said, we would love to hear this group's feedback and reflections as well, your experiences on our 3 themes, and maybe you have others. So I'm going to turn things over to Azish to walk us through this slide.
Well, thank you so much. And Tyler, I know we're likely running up against time for your next presentation. So I think in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we're allowing people to ask us questions. And if we're not getting questions, I might touch on some of these themes and see if I can generate conversation. So as Domi had mentioned, we were thinking, big picture about the themes of our hybrid approach. And we thought that the framework around institutional strategy, managing processes, and marketing and communications really hits the nail on the head as we thought about the hybrid challenge. Very much interested in how other researchers do this, particularly if you are with a center, but even if you're not, as I mentioned earlier, I think the APPE conference and the idea around applied research and the prominence that it takes within this space, in my mind, means that a lot of these challenges come up in traditional and typical research processes, as well as those within a center. So when it comes to aligning with institutional strategy, at the inception of choosing a project, how does that align with the strategic vision of the institution, and how does that factor into the hybrid approach? You can imagine if you were working for a corporate entity, you're looking to solve a problem and working backwards from that, as Domi mentioned in her presentation. For us, we were hypothesis driven. We had a view of the world and we wanted to understand whether that would be validated through our research. And we're trying to meet in the middle because our audience, so jumping down to the marketing and communications, we do have this dual audience, and we wanted to be able to navigate that communication need for the dual audience through our approach in providing our hypotheses-driven results, but also telling a coherent story around consumer trust in financial services and what executives can do to help engender trust within their work and among their employees. So some of those are the questions that I have, Tyler, for the group, to see if there's any takers in terms of how they've been able to navigate these hybrid challenges in their research processes.
Both of you come from different backgrounds. I thought I heard educational and legal standpoints, with kind of the lens of looking at things with the ethical considerations with organizations and institutions. What kind of, I'm sure, different perspectives on policymakers and getting things flowing in that regard with institutions. How have policies affected kind of your ability with the research and the hybrid model you have?
It's a great question, Tyler, and I'll kick it off and then hand it over to Domi for responses as well. As you can tell from Domi's presentation, she's a fantastic researcher. We're really lucky to have her as our Director of Research and Operations. And we have a really great skill set match, and that's by design. And that with me and my background, as you identified from the legal and policy space, I've done some research, but the research that I do is not based on large data sets, for instance, right? It's about thinking about and analyzing frameworks as it relates to policy developments. The more that that's informed by evidence, the more effective the policy can be. So having Domi on our team leading the large scale data research projects has been really influential in making sure that we are able to integrate those findings and the specific evidence that we feel would be important to be able to move forward the policy dialogue. So it's been a really great way to think about us working together and the future of the center as well. Domi, did you have anything you wanted to add on that subject?
I think you hit it on the nail. Thank you so much. You definitely have a perspective of me that I often don't see in myself. So I appreciate all those kind words. I think, Tyler, the question you raised is excellent. It's an excellent question, and definitely gives us food for thought as we continue our work. That policy, I think for us, we're very practice oriented because we're thinking about the financial services companies that are part of our network, part of almost our family that we're trying to get the results to. And I think too, there's that, like, if I think about it in terms of circles around our network, that policy angle is one that I think we have a lot of opportunity to explore. So that's the only thing I would add, is that that's an opportunity for us to dig deeper.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here today and giving an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Tyler. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a great day.